Hello everyone, welcome who have signed up, which really shows just how important adaptive management is and why it has such a prominent place on Beam's learning agenda. For those of you who are not yet familiar with Beam, we are a new global knowledge platform for market systems practitioners, just launched formally in September. Our goal is to improve and extend the application of market systems approaches. Through our website, social media networks, workshops and events, we aim to support development practitioners who work in market systems. I'm your host today, Ashley Ahrens. I work for Beam to support the growing community of practice around market systems approaches and bring people together to help advance Beam's learning agenda. I'm very happy to lead you through this webinar today, which is the second in our series, following one on measuring systemic change in late November. I'm particularly happy that we had today 3 experts in this field who will really give us some great insights from their own experience about how to use adaptive management approaches. We also have, I think, of the 4 of us, myself and our 3 presenters, each one of us is on a different continent. So I'm also pretty overwhelmed that the IT seems to be holding up. Before introducing our presenters, a few webinar pointers. This event is supposed to be interactive, and I would like to ask you all to use the chat box to ask any questions you have for the presenters. You send questions to staff in your chat box to ask questions to them. We will pick these up and try to answer them during the Q&A session in the second half of the webinar. If anything also is not working technically, please use the chat box as well to contact the Beam Exchange. We'd also like to invite you to give us your feedback about this event. We will provide you with a link to a short survey with a few brief questions about the webinar. It should take you less than 10 minutes. In particular, as this is only the second Beam webinar, we'd really appreciate your feedback so that we can continue to improve our webinars. There will also be a recording of this event, so you can listen to it again or recommend it to your colleagues and friends. Now to our presenters. Sorry, we're on this slide. So first of all, Amir Allana, our first presenter, is part strategist, part manager, part dreamer. He's building a career aimed at applying the principles of complex adaptive systems, systems thinking, and systems dynamics to real-world problems. In practical terms, this means working with organizations and teams to develop intervention strategies aligned with a systems change approach, and building a culture and processes that enable learning and adaptation within organizations. Amir will explore the experience of individual staff in a learning organization. He will be followed by Tim Sparkman, who is a development economist, entrepreneur, and systems thinker. He had the opportunity to lead the design and management of the Northern Cambodia Growth, Health, and Governance Program for its first 2 years, and since August has been working on a startup logistics company based in Kampala. He'll be sharing his experiences of applying adaptive management techniques in both of these contexts, focusing on compliance and contractual issues. Last but not least, Peter Roggekamp, who for the last 6 years has been the team lead of CAVAC, a large Australian agricultural program in Cambodia. Before this, Peter was manager and team leader of another market development program called Catalyst in Bangladesh. Peter became part of the market development scene while working for the ILO as a small enterprise specialist in East and West Africa. He will similarly be sharing the lessons he has learned about adaptive management from these programs, focusing on their organization and management. Following these presentations, we will have about 30 minutes for questions and answers. We have received some very interesting questions so far, and again, I encourage everyone to ask questions for presenters in the chat box. Now, can I hand you over to our first presenter, Amir?
Great, thanks, Ashley. Yeah, and thanks for organizing this. It's been quite an amazing experience because Beam has been great at just making sure all the logistics are sorted, and it's been a smooth ride so far. So let's hope the technology does hold up. So I'm gonna jump right in because 5 to 7 minutes is a very short amount of time to cover what is a topic that can be talked about for an hour. So what I've elected to do, because there's a lot of content in the paper that this is based on, is instead of trying to cover a whole bunch of broad, disparate points, I'm going to just tell 2 short stories to keep things grounded in what this really means on a day-to-day. And following those stories, I'll pull away a couple of key points that also come up in the paper. And the real meat of this webinar is going to be in your questions, so I look forward to that. So right into it. So Moses is a value chain development officer on a 5-year economic growth program. So I'm going to tell you about a day on an average day in Moses' life. He walks over to the field office. It's about 30 minutes away from his compound in the morning. His family is short on cash. He's stressed, so he's having some trouble. He arrives at the office, turns on his computer to check his email. His field coordinator comes by and hands him a facilitation plan for a training they'll be running for maize shellers that day. He's followed a plan like this before. It's easy. It's normal. It's a day-to-day. There's an all-team meeting in the morning, so Moses quickly wraps up his email, walks over to the bandana. The manager, Maria, goes over the latest data on how many farmers have been reached. The manager talks about reaching targets. The training program they're running now is the best way to do this. It's been proven. The donors are counting on us. The poor are counting on us. We must make sure that we are reaching as many people as possible with this training program. Moses and the team then head into the field for the day. Moses is still stressed about his family's financial situation. The thought that's running through his head as he's sitting in that car, heading towards the field, is, I must ensure I follow the guide perfectly, and all participants' forms are filled out. I must meet my targets. The second story is about Faria. It's a similar position, Economic Growth Officer, Value Chain Development Officer in a program. She walks to work and notices that there is a new sesame processor that has begun operations in the town. She makes a mental note of it. She gets to the office. Her colleague Hannah is standing next to a whiteboard with the number of factors listed. Hannah calls Faria over and says, "Did you notice the sesame processor in town? I wonder how that machine got fixed. There are no spare part dealers in the town." Faria says, "I wonder if the new transport route has anything to do with it. Let's go ask around later." There's a team meeting. The manager, John, asks, "What are we seeing in the field these days? How does that matter to food security in the region?" John emphasizes that their goal is to work with whatever actors to achieve the goal of improved commodity access in the region. Faria and Hannah mentioned that they noticed the sesame processor. A couple of staff nod. They say, yep, they noticed it too. They begin to list out questions that this brings up for their intervention strategies in the agricultural processing sector. John also puts down a few copies of an article on behavior change he read. I read this last weekend. You guys might find this interesting. Share it around. I'd love to hear what you think about it. Faria has a jam-packed day. She has a number of meetings with different actors. She also interviews a number of neighborhood stores that deal in sesame and maize to ask about the new processor. That night, as Faria goes to bed, she's still pondering the conversation she had that day. Her head is buzzing with questions, and she's excited to get back into the office the next day. Like I said, fairly short, but those two data points, I constructed them, and they are to highlight a couple of things. One being staff engagement and interest in the mission. When a staff believes that their role is to achieve a certain change, it opens up the space to dream, explore, and ask questions, and flexibility rests on that. So one of the key takeaways from the adaptive management paper and some of what we've learned about managing an organization for flexibility is that if a staff believes their job is to implement activities, that inherently will reduce the amount of new ideas and flexibility that emerges. The second is about the role of the manager and messaging. Has to be setting the right tone. If you notice between the two stories, in the first one, there's a lot more directness, a lot more structure, a lot less listening, and the culture of curiosity and listening and conversation grows over time, and it takes a lot of effort and consistency in the messaging between management and staff. And then finally, the tools and processes do matter. I do want to emphasize that. However, they did not show up in my 2 stories. And the reason they didn't is that tools and processes don't create a culture. They support the culture. And there are details on the tools and processes that we played with at GHG and in other programs in the adaptive management paper, and I'd love to hear your questions and thoughts on it. However, I do want to emphasize that they are secondary to the programming. So that's all I've got. That's my 6 minutes, and I look forward to hearing the conversation and the questions you have. Thank you.
Okay, so I suppose I'll pick it up from here. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
I'll take that as a yes. Okay, so so my piece is I've got another 6 minutes in the middle right here. I'm going to focus on compliance, and those of you who know me might find it humorous that I of all people would focus on the issue of compliance, but you can have as adaptive a culture as you want. You can be, really dynamic and interested and engaged in discovering fascinating things and developing good programming around that. But if the donor isn't comfortable with what is happening, then it makes it very difficult to continue with that. And so there are a few points that I think are important for that. One is budgeting and setting targets. Work planning, reporting, keeping the space for failure, and donor engagement. Most of us are like Eric, who think this is horribly boring, so I'm going to be relatively quickly. I think very few of us are like Amir. I think this is going to be fascinating. But at the same time, again, I think this is absolutely vital. It's the part. I think what Amir discussed is about the internal culture on a program, and what I'm talking about here is about how that program deals with donors and other parties. So starting out on the issue of budgeting, good. I think there it is. So I think as a starting point, to see, so your work plan can giveth, but the budget will taketh away. If you are beholden to an extremely specific, multi-year, hundreds of rows budget that lays out exactly what you can spend on every minute activity and when. And so we're, for the purposes of adaptive management, I think we are doing ourselves a favor by budgeting in as large of lump sums as we possibly can, especially if we're talking about out years. So the first year of a program, when you're writing a proposal, sure, you can have some idea of what you might be spending your money on, but as you move out from first year, it's it's asking a crystal ball. It's I think a similar exercise without your targets, and so the more vague we can be with approved budgets, especially as we move out from year one, the better off. Thirdly, maximizing contractual flexibility. Many programs come with a certain amount of contractual flexibility, but even those, but even when you have that, you can often receive pushback either from the donor or from within the compliance department of your own organization about the degree to which you can actually use that. And it's there to be used, and it should be used, because none of us are smart enough to know exactly how we're going to solve the terrific problems that we face ahead of getting into the situation and tinkering. Contractual flexibility is a useful tool for us to be able to reallocate resources as we learn and innovate our way into smart, contextually appropriate solutions. And lastly, maybe the biggest point is, sometimes in donor review you can get feedback that says, your overhead is too high, or your operational cost is too high because you have too many staff. Well, as Amir pointed out with the in the stories about engagement, we succeed and fail on the engagement and aptitude and interest and acumen of our staff, especially our national staff, and staff should be considered a program cost, at least program staff. I think there should be some movement within the donor circles to reconsider that, sort of how they consider those line items in in a proposal budget. So I think there it is. So setting targets. Targets are kind of evil things. They can hamstring your program. It's easy to send the wrong messages. They can force a culture of innovation to recoil like a hermit crab retracting back into its shell. I think not to give away Peter's presentation, but he's going to, I think, point out that we could get rid of targets. I would love to see us be able to get rid of targets, but I'd love to learn how that's possible. As for now, rules of thumb, we should set as few as possible. GHG, I think, by the time I left the program, had around 72 indicators and targets for all of them. And that was extremely difficult to manage. Obviously, that's maybe 3 times too many indicators for a program. And secondly, because of what we do, targets should probably focus on the behaviors that we're trying to elicit, rather than things like gross margin of farmers assisted by a program. Behaviors tell you what's really happening as a result of your work, or sort of correlated with your work, whereas this kind of outputs are very difficult. Lastly, volume of partnership, I think, is an acceptable output. Especially for facilitated programs that rely on dozens and dozens of partnerships. But you wouldn't want to make a target out of that. So I want to be clear on the slide. I'm not recommending that we say, the program's going to have 80 partnerships by the end of year 1. But a discussion looking at the beginning, the early stages of a facilitative adaptive program should focus on the quality and types and quantity of partnerships that the program is developing. So moving to the next stage of work planning. Work planning is messy and enjoyable and is a continual process. So work plans given to donors should reflect the actual process of work planning that takes place on a project. If we're forced to provide Gantt charts, then the Gantt charts, rather than just listing in detail exactly what's going to happen and when, should maybe just include a discussion or sort of detail. At this point, we're going to start experimenting with with setting up a network of retailers that are providing good quality seed on with new commercial relationships that we've pulled out from the capital city, for example. And so what you're laying out in a work plan for the donor, what you're contractually obligated to follow in terms of a work plan is perhaps it's easier to have it be set up as a schedule of experimentation rather than a schedule of activities with concrete outputs that the proposal team worked on well in advance of the program even starting. And then similarly for reporting, I think a good report from an adaptive project could have 3 things in it. You could talk about what was tried, how it went, and what did not work as expected. Secondly, the report should discuss what the program team learned from that failure. And then thirdly, the report should say exactly what is being done on the program in light of the learning that resulted from what was tried before. That alone, I think, would be a sort of wheat from the chaff moment for really pulling out thoughtful, innovative, adaptive programs from programs that are just following a Gantt chart. You can't fake adaptation. And this would be a good way for donors to demand that their programs show them exactly how they are adapting. So second to last, so this is a game that my kids showed me called Blocks, and it's addictive. For any of you who want to try it, just set aside some time. What I love about this game is that it's nearly impossible, if not totally impossible, to predict exactly how to move the block to get it over into that little hole that you see on the far right of the screen there. You have to tinker to do it. You have to try and screw it up 100 different times before you finally get the right angle and get the block in there. Now imagine that the board is moving constantly. The pieces are moving around, and there are thousands of other blocks on the board that are all trying to achieve their own ends at the same time. And that's a simplified version of the challenges that we face in the course of doing development work. And so failure isn't just a hot topic or just an edifying thing. Failure is an absolutely essential component of success for the work that we do. If you're not trying and failing, then you're not learning enough to get to the point where you can actually do something that's going to work. And so it's not just something that's nice to have in addition to your normal program, a culture of embracing failure and talking about it and trying to incorporate it. It's absolutely essential to being successful for what we do. And I think that point can't be made enough. And that in a nutshell is the whole reason for adaptive management. There was a great question that someone asked ahead of time about what's the difference between adaptive management and just good-fashioned proactive attentive management. Well, adaptive management is a subset of that, but it's a type of management that is appropriate to dealing with a tremendous amount of uncertainty, where a program team has to discover and iterate its way into impact. And so that's I don't think it can't be overemphasized. Lastly, the question of the right level of donor engagement. I don't know. I don't have a lot of points for this one, but it's an absolutely vital issue. You don't want to, as an adaptive program, you don't want to have to be going back to the donor and asking for permission every time you have a tactical change or even a strategic shift. At the same time, you don't want the donor to feel isolated from the decisions that are being made, and for the donor rep that you're dealing with to feel worried that he or she is going to be put in a compromising position because he or she is not fully aware of what's going on in the project, doesn't quite know why these shifts are being made, can't tell, can't ever predict when they have a conversation with you about what you're going to be doing now. So that's a big remaining challenge that we have, and it probably depends on the donor and it probably depends on the rep, but one thing I think is certain is that the way that some donor institutions are set up now, it strongly incentivizes a very high sense of risk aversion, especially among frontline donor staff, and I think that finding ways to coax a sort of a broader or a stronger risk tolerance and sense of engagement with the program would be a very important part of successfully implementing an adaptive program from the donor perspective. So that wraps me up, and I'll hand over to Peter.
There we are. With Rosetta's fillet, and I think you all saw this, and this was absolutely amazing, I think, how a piece of technology flew through space for more than 10 years and then landed on a very small piece of ice. I think that is a fantastic example of great engineering. To do that, that must have been very complicated, but not complex. And it's not adaptive management because they were able to make a plan even 10 years ahead and execute it. Sorry, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Peter Roggekamp. I've managed 2 large development programs that both applied adaptive management systems, and I would like to share some of the lessons with you. Like the others, 10 minutes is nothing, or 5 minutes to explain everything. So I have decided to give a very general overview. So both my programs, Catalyst and Kabak, were very much M4P programs. But somehow this M4P theory never fitted well with the reality in which we worked. And when William Easterly and Owen Barter and people like that started to talk about searchers and planners and complex systems, we absolutely loved it. It was like somebody finally understood our reality. Now, I think adaptive management is not a replacement of M4P. It's more like an addition. It is more like an evolution. This M4P really comes from this world of engineers, people who believe in, I think, in a makeable reality. It could be complicated, but it's still predictable, like this flight of Rosetta. Whereas the markets we operate in, they behave unpredictable, they are complex, they are non-linear. And I think this is where the misfit with the more traditional MPP thinking was. In the more traditional MPP, people often talk about constraints, and you have to address constraints in a complicated context, whereas I think where it's really about is we operate in a complex and not in a complicated context, and addressing constraints doesn't work so well. It is all about promoting innovation. I think that's a much better strategy to operate in a complex environment. You probably all know this slide from Owen Barter, where he explains complexity. Now, complexity, in my view, is really related to this context, to the socio-economic reality in which our beneficiaries and the private sector and so operates. Interventions can be simple, can be something from simple to complicated, but they shouldn't be complex. And if we operate in this socio-economic reality, this complex one, then then we have to apply adaptive management to be successful. Now, in my introduction, I promised you some of my reality, of the lessons from Catalyst when I was still there, and certainly from Kavak. And I think there are those two large programs, that are managed in a very adaptive way. And I think with success, that shows that adaptive management as a whole management concept is definitely possible, but you have to get many things right. And if you look at my slides, I've written down a lot of text, but don't worry, I will just glimpse over it quickly, and you can read it later if you want. But let me explain some of these things that you have to get right. Well, first of all, the design. It's good if it is flexible, what people say. And flexible, I think, means that it allows for a very wide portfolio of activities early on, and that you can play with that portfolio. And I think it refers to the internal systems. Now, we could do that in Catalyst and Kavak, and I know about a few other Australian aid programs like MDF or the new 3I. I think they're all designed in that way, or at least they are implemented in that way. So it's definitely possible. A lot of people talk about donors, that they lose control. And of course, if you say, well, we can't predict it, they will not be so happy. But I think the key is that is the way donors control the program. If they can let go of monitoring progress on results and move to monitoring the capacity of a program to implement, I think it also gets a lot of control, and that worked at least in our case. In a lot of MVP thinking, people think if you do a lot of large researches early on, then you really understand the reality and you can really address the key constraints. I think that works in this complicated reality of flying to a comet somewhere 10 years away. But in our reality, it's much better to start quickly and to do little research up front and to do, in a way, a continuous learning through monitoring, etc. Well, interventions are all about innovation, of course. The portfolio of interventions, I think if you want to be able to do adaptive management, you have to start with a rather large portfolio, and then later on you can, in a way, reallocate your resources on the things that work best. It also saves a lot of time, so don't wait till things fail, but just have enough choice up front. I saw that Jim Tamlin was also on the list, so Jim, this is one that's for you on M&E. And I don't think M&E is really about so much about results measurement. I think it's much more, in the first place, about it's a great tool to learn and adjust. It's a great adaptive management tool, and if you do that right, you almost get the impact figures for free. Of course, adaptive management is all about adjustment, and adjustment should be a continuous process. That's a different thing than allowing for failure. Failure means we did something wrong, and you don't do things wrong in adaptive management. it's not about correcting mistakes, it's about optimizing success. And finally, Tim, your thing about targets. I'm fully with you. If you set targets the wrong way, they kill honesty. If you lose the honesty, honest learning, in a way, also adaptive management will become very difficult. And I do think it's a task for project managers to protect the programs from targets. Now, if you really need targets, make aggregated targets. Aggregated targets, it doesn't matter if some interventions don't go so well. If others goes better, then you aggregate the targets, they look good. So I think that's the key, but keep them away from your staff. Well, my next slide says, aren't we forgetting something, with some nice pictures. Next slide says, yes, we're always forgetting that great designs also need to be implemented. And somehow that's where it always goes wrong. And my presentation so far was still about designs more or less, but it's really about what is the key success stories in implementing a program. I think the key success for programs is always down to, well, first of all, the quality of your local experts. They're the biggest factor. And then the environment in which they work, and then the flexibility of programs' internal systems around it. And I think it's really so simple. If you get this right, you have a good program. So that's the key to success. And so what we did in Kavak and also in Catalyst, I think we hired the cleverest people we could find and coached them intensively. That's the role of experts, I think. We placed a lot of emphasis on group work rather than individual, and we worked hard to create a creative environment. And for that reason and other reasons, we work with a very flat organizational structure. We invested heavily in a culture of what we call honest inquiry, and I think we managed that more or less. And it's a weird thing because it goes against human nature, but I think we more or less agreed that. And then, of course, the internal systems, and they should be designed to change activities and contracts, etc. And I would like to stress they should be designed for that, designed to change and not allowing for change. I think that's a huge difference. So we're back actually to the slide of the experts on complex systems. This one I stole from Owen Barter when he did the Kapuscinski lectures. I think you're all aware. And I think the recommendations, they were more made for general for development, but some of them are very applicable to our programs as well. Now you're supposed to see a bit more happening. But the first one says resist engineering. Well, that's exactly the story that would work if you get someone on Comet 10 years away, but not in our reality. The second one is avoid isomorphic mimicry. Actually, that means don't copy everything. And in a complex reality, you can't just copy. Another one I was going to highlight is embrace experimentation. And there we have to be a bit careful, because it doesn't mean you can do everything you want. Experimentation goes together with trying and learning, has to go hand in hand, and it needs to be controlled by good strategies. And actually, the strategies give you the focus. And then the last one, of course, is the one I started almost with, promote innovation. That is absolutely the key. This is actually the summary, you can read it yourself. And then we go to my last slide. If you want to read a bit more, there are actually 3 things that we produce that I can recommend you. First is our Kavak website. The second is almost in 2012, I wrote a document for the DCED seminar on M&E, and what I think is much about adaptive management. And thirdly, with a few colleagues, we wrote a paper of designing good programs from a program manager's perspective. So thank you, that was my presentation. I hope it was useful. Over to Ashley, I suppose.
Hello everyone. I hope you can hear me now. Thank you so much to our three presenters. There were really three really inspiring presentations, and I got a lot of those. Not just the very interesting content, but some great cartoons. I need to go back to a little bit. So yeah, thanks everyone. I think we received some very interesting questions in advance. I think it was Scott Yetter, Mohammed Hoka, who were asking us about what's the difference between adaptive management and good proactive management that Tim responded to. Please, can you send us in any questions you would like answered? The easiest one, Jean Downing asked, could we have a copy of these slides later? And yes, of course you can. But please keep on sending in those interesting questions. The first question I'd like to ask to Amir is a question from Ben Fowler. And he asks, what are the best methodologies for regular communication and sharing when the teams are not co-located? So straight away, he's looking for something very practical there.
Yeah, great. Thanks for the question, Ben. It's a good one. It's a tough one. But I know that not only kind of teams of consultants like mine, but even teams on programs face that issue when they've got geographically distributed staff. So a couple of things. One framework that I found really useful is kind of applying the criminal behavior framework to knowledge management, which is that staff need the means, the motives, and the opportunities to communicate and to share information. So it's instead of trying to enforce sharing, it's like, how can I increase the means by which they can share, the motives that they have to share, i.e. things they're working together on that forces them to almost be communicating and in touch, and then the opportunities is that how many touch points are there by which they can be sharing information and communicating. So a couple of pointers. One is an upfront investment in relationships. It goes a long way, especially in the first 4 to 6 months of a team working together. This doesn't have to be an investment in working together necessarily face-to-face, but just getting to know each other as human beings. That reduces the barrier to picking up the phone and calling whenever you need to reaching out by email. So that's just almost a precursor. It's both kind of a motives thing and a means thing. It's just reducing that personal barrier. Some more practical tools is that my team has used kind of a simple Monday update table just to keep everyone in the loop on what each other is working on, which has been doing it for years. So clearly, like, there's something that's low input, high output is just on a Monday morning, everyone fills out their piece of the table, which is emailed around, and the table says, what did you do last week? What are you going to do this week? One key success, one key challenge, and a shout out to anyone else on the team, or even in the sector based on something they've seen that they're impressed by, and it just kind of keeps each other in the loop at a very basic 1 to 2 sentence level on what everyone's doing, and then that triggers people asking more questions of each other and deeper conversation. The second one is something we've used in Uganda, and this is obviously depends on whether your staff or staff in a program have access to data and a cell phone, which not everyone does. But if you do have a smartphone, having a WhatsApp group has been really useful. Just creating a group chat on WhatsApp where a message sent by one individual gets received by everyone else. So it keeps kind of a conversation going. Sometimes it becomes informal and less work-related, but again, it's increasing the means and the opportunities to communicate and share. So those are just a couple of thoughts, but anyone else, please feel free to jump in.
Thanks very much, Amir. Yeah, and to other presenters, we have a lot of interesting questions here, so I'll direct these to one or two of you, but please feel free to jump in. This next question just came in the webinar, and I thought it was really great. So Jean Downing asks, and this is for Tim here, so I feel you could all add something here. But Jean asks, instead of targets, could you develop intermediate outcome indicators that demonstrate the project is moving in the desired direction and getting some traction? This would inform donors that the project is having results. Tim?
Yeah, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Great question, Gene. And I think as you know, having read some of your own stuff, I think as you'd also point out, you know, your results change should come with, you know, should have a lot of sort of interim indicators of progress that tell you whether you're hitting whether you're seeing the behaviors that you're trying to achieve, whether you're trying to coax out of a group of actors. So I think that those indicators are probably the best ones. They're what, you know, what we use to see how we're doing. But the challenge with that, I think, from a donor perspective, and then the problem with replacing targets with something like that is you wouldn't, you know, those should be easy to change as frequently as the team sees the need to change them. So you wouldn't want to put that into, you know, like a multi-year indicator scheme. You know, they're great for guidance, but and then there's also what Meadows said, when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to become a measure. I think that's what she said. Anyway, so those are just the 2 points of caution I would make in terms of replacing what targets achieve with that kind of an interim indicator.
Okay, thanks very much. I don't know if there's any more thoughts on that, but we have a collection of questions. Actually, perhaps Gene can advise us on around the donor experience. And I think then there's two sets. We have kind of Jason Andrews asking how is this carrying over to donor management, and a similar question from Andrew Gabrowski. So asking about how comfortable are donors with this approach, and also what strategies are best for working with donors. And a question just in from Wolfgang Baum, very similar. In your experience, which donors are most open to proposals of programs that are adaptively managed? So a lot of people are interested in, you know, these are great ideas. How do these work with donors? Are they responsive? Peter?
Yeah, let me give it a shot. I think adaptive management is certainly not yet in the DNA of donors. But I think, like in most organizations, there are very experienced people in donor organizations who normally immediately get it, and there are bureaucrats who never will. So I think that the key thing is that you have to earn it. You have to earn flexibility through trust. And trust is something you have to build over years. You don't get that for free in your first few months. So there is, I think, a lot of ways how you can build trust, but that's the obvious one you can think of, but let me still mention a few. It does make a difference if you have early successes. And in your portfolio, you have to make sure you have early winners. That changes a lot. I think it's important that you're transparent and open. What helped in most of my programs is that we got external consultants with a great reputation that the donor trusts. So even if they don't understand us, if these consultants later say to the donors, well, no, they're on the right path, that creates credibility and trust. I think it helps a lot if you not only listen to your direct donor counterpart, but if you understand what the things is he or she needs to answer up the chain, and if you help your direct donor partner counterpart with answering his or her questions and problems. And creatively you might actually, because he might understand what you do, but he or she also still needs to report. Another one we talked about quickly is, I think it's much better to work with aggregated impact projections, total outreach, rather than per each intervention, and give early projections of it. That really helps organizations a lot. And it also means that if something goes wrong, as long as other things go better than expected, you still stick to your projections. Tim, you talked about that donors are very risk adverse in this respect, and that's also an argument you can use, because in a way adaptive management is a risk reduction strategy. It means that if something doesn't go right, you improve it so it goes better. So with quantum donors, if you explain that, they say, yeah, of course. So again, it's all about earning your space, even if it's not in the initial design. Yeah, someone was it Wolfgang or so asked about which donors. Now, I'm really not the expert to say that, but I work with a few donors who, in a way, all were all. I think it was a bit the same story. Australian aid, where I changed to DFAT, I work with now. They're great in my program, but they're very difficult in other programs. When in Catalyst, we had a number of donors, STC, I think they always listened very well and were very open to it. The people we had in DFAT, they really understood it. So I think there's a lot of donors that are open. That is, you just need to earn it. Maybe that's enough. Over to you, Ashley.
Thanks very much. Does anyone else want to put in their 2 cents there? Well, feel free to jump in, but I know we are speaking at Beam to a number of donors around this, in particular DFID, and it's very interesting. They've released their new smart rules that are very much about providing to their staff in country more flexibility, and we're very much engaging with them around this. We had a couple of questions that came in around program culture, which is probably best directed to all of you. But let's start with Amir, and I think we've also heard Amir's paper and Navigating Complexity mentioned, and of course we'll be sharing that with you all as well. So Amir, Mike Klassen asks, what is the hardest part about setting an internal learning culture in a program? Any advice on tactics for senior managers on how to overcome these?
Well, it's a big question. I'll throw in a couple of points and also then shoot it over to Tim, who I'm sure has a lot to say on the topic, and Peter as well. So one thing that comes to mind is and this is almost unfair, but a manager trying to build a learning culture is going to have to take on the task as if it's more than just a job. It is not just a job. Like it becomes a very emotionally invested part of your life to be constantly monitoring at a qualitative level, like how staff are interacting, who's saying what, what's the feel around the office, what types of different messages are being sent around by individuals on your staff, and what are you going to put your weight behind it? What are you going to try and diminish the impact of? So, for example, if a mid-level manager under you is asking staff to fill out a ridiculous form every time they do an activity, and you think actually this is gonna stifle creativity, how do you strategically, both in a double-barreled way, step back on that form itself and help that mid-level manager be more adaptive in his or her role as well? So, but having to think through these things as to like every action you take is going to have an impact on the culture of the organization, and this is especially true in the first year of a team forming and gelling and developing behaviors. So so it's emotionally draining. So any advice on tactics is that keep a check on your own engagement as well, because as a senior manager, if you do start to lose motivation, if you start to become disgruntled, you're going to begin to make bad decisions. So fight the war, not the battle, which means that self-care is pretty key, which is a very soft thing to say, but it's true. Watching out for your own energy level so that you're able to best watch out for your staffs as well. Tim and Peter, please feel free to jump in on this one. It's a pretty loaded question.
I'm going to jump in first, and I'm going to add some more questions around the program culture, and then we'll expand that. Hopefully, Tim and Peter come in. So Mike asked another question. Mike Klassen, how much does the senior manager need to create a buffer between immediate frontline donor concerns and messaging the program staff inside the program? And taking a different approach, well, a different question, but I thought, well, on the culture. Makaravi Tai asks, can you share what is the 360-degree change in your organization? Why does it lead to success? I'll put this both to you, Tim. Or perhaps just focus on the first one if that's a bit too much right now.
Okay. Right. So on the question of buffering, I'd say absolutely, and I think that's normal, and I think that's probably something that you would see in a lot of situations where you have you have very distinct sets of people working together with very different concerns, very different incentives and obligations, and so I think that the program manager stands in between two very different worlds, and needs to pay a tremendous amount of attention, as Amir developed, to creating the internal culture conducive to adaptive management, but at the same time paying attention to a constituency that is focused on the stewardship of taxpayer funds and meeting contractual obligations and navigating immense and difficult bureaucracy of a large donor. So I think that's a very important role for a manager. But again, I think it's not entirely necessarily unique to this type of situation.
Peter, can I get your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm very eager to say something because we really place a lot of emphasis on that in Kabak. And we realized that when we did interventions that didn't go wrong, some of the staff actually frowned out and didn't tell it. And then we realized it's so much against human nature almost to say what I did last year didn't work. And it's even more against, they're afraid of the career, of the salary increase. In Asia, there is another thing as well. They really don't want to say something bad about went wrong for their colleagues, because then you would not be loyal to your colleagues. And most organizations actually have a culture of loyalty. And a culture of loyalty is not very good for adaptive management. So what we have done is from the first day we realized that. So from the first day, every time we gave feedback, we were always very much aware that we could never say, how could you have been so stupid? Because, I mean, then you're 2 years back in creating that culture. It's very fragile. You can easily kill it. We did some active workshops where we really made people clear what the consequences were that they didn't tell it. So we showed where interventions went wrong. We praise people all the time when they say, well, what we didn't work. And I think we're probably at 70% of success there, and it's definitely not 100. So that's a few more lines on culture.
Okay, thanks very much. We're getting into our last few minutes now. Can I ask any presenters anything to add on the culture? Okay, so yeah, thanks very much everyone for joining. A couple questions or comments that have come in. There's been a particular request to Peter if we can share his draft guidelines for program design and to get comments from webinar from yourselves. So Peter, if a second I'll ask you if you're happy for us to share that. But it is definitely that guidance is one of the best things I've read in this area for a while. Also, we received a comment on working with donors from Lawrence Wild, who said that he feels adaptive management programs, especially using a facilitative approach, take longer to start up to show results compared to traditional models. Donors who are not aware of this will get nervous by the slow start and the lack of results in year one, for example. So he says that educating the donors is key to setting expectations. On that note, I want to have a final round of comments from our presenters. If there's any questions you'd like to ask other people, or any final comments you have about what we discussed. Perhaps Amir, any final comments?
Not particularly, but I'd say that events like these and writing the pieces that are coming out with regards to adaptive management and what it means for donors, what it means for managers, these are all good steps. I think myself and others who are eager for development to really be flexible and adaptive are fairly, I'd say we're impatient to live in a world where this is the norm and not the fringe. But I think I'd encourage anyone who has the opportunity to take a few risks in terms of how they manage, try something different, share it, because that's the way that we're going to build that energy and crescendo around this topic, and I think it's vitally important if you want development dollars to be used effectively.
Hey, thanks very much. And Tim, any final comments?
But it's always hard to follow Amir. But I mean, he said, you know, everything that I was thinking of, and then a few more things. I guess I would just finish by saying that it's really a lot more exciting way to work as well. It's it's development as a process of discovery, and it's sort of a rolling problem-solving activity of that requires a lot of engagement and a lot of confidence on self-confidence on the part of the people who are doing the work, and with the benefit that I think it's also ultimately much more effective for, especially for facilitated work, market systems work, and things like that. And lastly, just thank you for the opportunity to participate in the webinar today. I appreciate it.
Thanks very much. It's been great to have you here. And Peter, some final words?
Ooh. Well, where do we start? No, well, I think I put it in my slide as well. And for programs like this for M4P, I don't really think you have a choice. I think if you don't do it in an adaptive management way, you never get to success. So, yeah, there is no other choice. Just turn your program around, create the flexibility with the donor, and do it. That's what I could say, I think.
Thanks very much. Those are very, very wise final words. With this, everyone, I want to close the webinar. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for your very active participation and all the great questions. We really hope that you gain something from this and some ideas about adaptive management that are relevant for your work. As there was really an overwhelming number of questions, we couldn't sadly answer all of them, and we'll very much aim to answer more as a follow-up to this webinar. So stay tuned. You'll receive an email from us with our responses and where you can go for more. We'd also like to highlight some resources that further delve into adaptive management. As you cannot click the links in the slides, we are also posting them into the chat box now so you can directly click on them. And this case study, Navigating Complexity, Adaptive Management of the Northern Karamoja Growth, Health and Governance Program, is a key read on program experience of adaptive management. CAVAC's website contains a wealth of information as well on how the program operates. On the BEAM website, we've prepared a page with a general introduction to adaptive management that has key links for you to follow, including a paper written by Peter that he mentioned for the 2012 Donor Committee for Enterprise Development Seminar in Thailand, reflecting on M&E, and a draft paper developed by Peter with colleagues, Guidelines for Good Market Development Program Design, so you will have a chance to see it. There are a great deal of resources on market systems approaches on the website, so I would encourage you to visit it and sign up for more information at our website. Also check out, of course, our LinkedIn page where you can interact with other practitioners and ask questions about all things around market systems development. Please participate as well in the short survey, and you can find the URL in the chat box now. Last but not least, I would also like to thank our three presenters for introducing us to this topic and sharing their really exciting experiences with us. We hope that you enjoyed this event, and we wish you a great rest of your day. Thank you.